Last week, put out the podcast just looking at a few considerations around the new rules in Gaelic football. Since then, a load of people, thank you to everyone, got in touch with just a couple of numbers, GPS-wise approaches they're taking, and feedback from some players around how they found condition games within training forced towards the new rules, but also what they've gotten from in-house games or early league matches. Also, Jimmy Guinness, Desi Farrell came out with a lot of thoughts and realistically struggles that their players are having when adapting to the new rules, bearing in mind these are really conditioned teams in Donegal and Dublin. Damien O'Sullivan, friend of the show, got in contact looking at some of his experiences around various clubs around Cork. This is a man with both S&C and performance nutrition experience at senior inter-county level in hurling and football. So he's jumping on here now today to give his experiences of what he's noticed with different teams, but also give little bits of advice around how he thinks, and we'll discuss them together, how to best prepare players for what's coming, with a few suggested tweaks around some approaches he's seen, some good ideas he thinks will work out, but also some things to be aware of and progressions of those. This is going up on both Spotify and YouTube, so you can get the audio or the video version of this if you want. Damien, how's the week been?
Not too bad, John. Not too bad. Busy.
You're busy between the few jobs that you're doing, Biorish, etc.
There are a few moving parts, all right. Yeah, nothing new like that.
The main thing we want to talk about today is this new rules. I put out a few bits myself last week around what to be aware of, but also how to build up towards it. While on this, thanks so much. I actually had a good few get in contact with me with a few numbers. I'm obviously not going to share where I got any of those because I need to respect their privacy and everything, and we're going to dig into them a little bit. But just from not even so much the team you're coaching yourself this year, but the players who've been into in the recovery suite, what are they saying around changes in training, how they're feeling it, and also how that might carry over to some games and stuff they've been playing?
Yeah, it's been an interesting mix. Obviously, this is all just kind of individual. We've no hard data to work off yet. We're going off what some individuals are doing with some teams, so it's going to be a little bit. I suppose you should take anything here with a pinch of salt, because we do have to wait and see how the game actually unfolds over the next 8-9 months. But I've had a mixture of people coming in. What I've seen is that some teams have gone back. Gaelic football teams have gone back training in December ahead of this to try and up their overall output. So I've had a good few players from a few different teams who have been back quite a while, and what they're working toward is increasing their total distance during a game, and they're also trying to increase their high speed running in that. So a good few of those players are wearing GPSs and they're tracking that. So while I think you made a great point last week that you still kind of need to start off at your start off point, there's what I've seen coming in, or your usual start off point, because lads are coming in off the back of an off season, and you're just trying to get them back up to a good level. But some teams have gone down a route of where we're just going to go hard from the get-go, and more teams are kind of gradually building up. And again, anecdotally, from some lads who are used to wearing GPSs as they play, a couple of them have been mentioning to me that they are covering somewhere in the region of, in challenge games, in-house games, that kind of thing, in the region of 2 to sometimes up as far as maybe 2.7, 3k extra distance in a game. Obviously, I'm speaking here about your middle eight players, and those specific middle eight players are players who are used to covering quite a bit of distance, but they're covering somewhere in the region of 2 to 3k extra in a game, and of that, it depending on the individual, it's been anywhere from an extra maybe 500-600 meters of high speed running to one fellow was telling me that he's doing about 1200 extra meters of high speed running on top of what he would have been doing last season with his GPS. So again, it's anecdotal, but that's where some teams are going with their training so far. How that'll actually come out in the game, we have to wait and see, especially at club level. But that's kind of what I've been getting back from people. More clubs then are looking at it from a completely different perspective. They're saying we're just going to do the same thing we've always done and see what happens.
Two bits to look on there. So those players or groups who went back in December to build up the extra outputs and all, was that largely through just like isolated running or dry condition, as I say it, or they're trying to mix it between running and football?
All running. So isolated running. Some teams have been bringing in just a lot of zone 2. Just out you go, get your 5, 6, 7, 8K run in, staying in that zone 2, zone 3 steady state. More I know are doing interval type running where they're hitting 750 to 1 kilometer runs at, in around 4 to 4:30 minute pace. So there's been there's been a couple of different routes that people have been going down, but it's been very much a case of running.
Okay, zone 2 runs is interesting, something I've different thoughts on. I might come back to in a while. And the players who you're chatting to, but especially coming into the recovery suite, how do they feel? So this is we've a week gone in February. Are they saying how they feel different compared to previous years still at this stage, like from the change in training? Or how they feel after like the few in-house games and stuff they've played?
So, yeah, obviously this time of year we're used to people they're tired, they're fatigued, the training volume has gone up, so it's a bit of a hit. But what I suppose being told, again, being in a recovery suite, I'm in an unusual position where I get to see so many different lads coming in or from different backgrounds, but they're sore. They are sore. They're finding it hard to recover from one training to the next. A lot of lads are saying that their hamstrings are a lot sore than they would have expected, than they're used to. I've had a few people coming in with calf strains. Again, that could be partially down to the time of year that we're running. If they're mixing between running on some teams were doing road running, some were doing kind of trail runs, more we're doing field-based sessions. But for those on the field, a lot of them just seem to be kind of very sore from the distance running and running on soft ground. So I would say across the board from what I'm getting is that people are sore, hamstrings and calves being specific.
And it's probably just from the overall increase in volume in general, but particularly high speed running. To tie it in then, so after the Dublin Donegal game last week, Jim McGuinness and Desi Farrell were saying how like it is a big impact on their players. Like straight up, Dublin and Donegal, you nearly say are the most conditioned. Now I know most like Division 1, even Division 2 teams are like unbelievably conditioned anyway, but you'd always say it around Donegal and Dublin, particularly over the last 15 years I suppose. So if they're struggling, you're thinking these must be serious outputs. I think we need to be careful then to say, well, let's not just jump straight in and go really hard at loads of extra work. We probably need to I don't want to go too much down the route of how we adapt our game style and all, but we probably do need to be smart enough and say we need to play a little bit more of a control style, rotate the players, whatever it might be, so that we're not just hammering with loads of extra load. And to re-emphasise the point last week, let's not try up all the running through games and do extra isolated high-speed running, because it's just a double increase in volume. Are most teams largely doing it through extra running even now the games have come in, or they may be pulling off during the week that there's extra running the games, in-house, league games, challenge games? Are they pulling back on the run, or are they still trying to up both?
So of the counties that I've had coming into me that started in December, some of them have already started their pre-season kind of competitions. So they're getting games in at the weekend, and they're trying to get as much of their team used to it. So they're kind of flooding the bench, whether it be at halftime or whatever, they're getting lads in. But there seems to be I suppose a divide in that some teams are still going down look, we're just going to keep running and we just really need to get ourselves a lot fitter and really work on speed as well then afterwards. But we're really focusing on fitness more, or kind of splitting it, say with 2 sessions in the week. They're getting a heavy running session, and then they're having a more football based session later in the week. So it's been mixed. So I guess what I'm saying is that we have different coaches taking different approaches to the sport. So that's it. It hasn't been kind of set, and from that perspective, it's hard to know what direction things will go. I do know that even from say flooding the bench perspective there, I think we're still seeing most benches at the inter-county game still being kind of used in around the 45 minute mark, which was the case all along. So they haven't really changed when they're bringing players in and out. Now maybe that's, again, it has to come with a learning curve, that maybe that'll change. But if that's the way, that if we're kind of sticking to the same kind of timing for getting players in off the bench to get lads off, does that mean that most clubs are going to have to kind of make sure that their 24-25 man panel is all up at the required level that the county game is starting to show?
Just to look then at some of so again, thanks to the people who sent in a few bits. So from GPS, looking at league games compared to, people didn't really specify if it was compared to like championship time or league time last year, so I have to be careful on what we say here. But they're saying they're looking at about a 10 to 15% increase in total distance and in high speed running. So the extra distance isn't just from high speed running, there is just a bit of extra distance in general, and that's around the middle 8. But on the flip side of that, there's about a 30% decrease in high speed running in the 3v3s, so like your 3 staying back and your 3 staying up, which is a massive drop in the amount of work. Well, sorry, not work isn't the right word there, but the amount of like just distance being covered by them. I wonder, will teams get a little bit more, I suppose, systemised in how they rotate the 3 up, 3 back? But we'll take a step backwards on that for a second. But like, so 10 to 15% extra high speed running is, you're talking 2, 3, 4, potentially 500 metres of high speed running extra. Maybe some players going from 1900, 2k to 2.5k, which is a lot. So you need to be very mindful of how we build that up and prepare them for them. We need to be very careful here of the big jumps. Like if we see that as our end goal across the training week, we want more high speed running, I think we need to slowly build that over the course of, like, give this time. Like, no one really has championship till August, slightly different depending on the county. So I think trying to target, like, let's do really well in the league here and be really fit for it. I'd pull back a little bit and say, let's get as much as we can out of 40 minutes of play and then pull back, because if you train up that volume, that intensity and volume at the same time, it's just going to be so hard. And as you said, all the really sore hamstrings and everything. A sore hamstring on a Saturday or Sunday match carried into a Tuesday evening train where you're still trying to hit decent high speed running, that's just a recipe for disaster. So managing players, managing how you build up that overall workload is going to be challenging, and it's going to take a bit of patience. And I think I would definitely err on the side of, let's pull back slightly, because it's far easier to have players slightly under condition in June, July and do a little top up on that than have them overcooked, because it's so hard to come back from that. And even how we build up that fitness, you mentioned there about the zone 2 stuff. I'm interested that a good few people have done it running wise. What are your thoughts there?
Like, I suppose from the perspective of increasing your overall base fitness, and again during possibly the time of year it was being done in, you're looking at December, early January there, maybe it was just a case of, for some of those teams, it's the easiest way to get lads to do something, without having to, bring them all in and have them, on a wet night, all having to pull in together. But I wouldn't necessarily say it is the best way to approach an invasion team sport, where you are really depending on just, yes, you want that base fitness, but there's a lot of like high speed movement there. So do you really need to be spending a lot of time doing that zone 2? Because realistically, zone 2 does need time. If you're going to be trained there, you need to be doing that it's not just over a couple of weeks. That's over a couple of months across a year or two. If you're looking at any runners or anything like that, their zone 2 training is geared toward what they're trying to achieve in 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and it'll be a part of their weekly training. That zone 2 stuff isn't really going to be part of your GAA training for the season. So like, are you getting much out of it by doing it for a couple of weeks in December and January? Maybe, but there'll probably be better options there for you. Like, I'd be more of a fan of using maybe interval type running, where you're trying to hold maybe your 75-80% runs for a distance, recover, get going again, building up that way. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure I will go down the zone 2 type of a route myself.
Yeah, look, I think there's actually a lot of misconceptions on what zone 2 is. I'm hoping to record a video on it later this evening and just put it out over on the YouTube side. But in general, I spoke to an athletics coach about this a couple of weeks ago, and he'd know his physiology really well around this. So he tested inter-county hurling team, like elite top 5 team, and most of them had quite high rest and lactate, which is not surprising, because fast twitch athletes, if you're a really good inter-county hurler, you're probably predominantly fast twitch, the odd outlier. So you're going to have high rest and lactate. The type of movement required to run in zone 2 is so unnatural to how they move. It's just so hard for them to control it, to keep their heart rate down, to actually move like that. Like, I'm not that fast running, so me going for a run, I can keep my heart rate down and all. But a really good athlete, it's just they're plodding along in a shape and in a movement that isn't remotely natural to them. It's going to take away from the faster type movements they want to do, and still their heart rate is going to go up really high. Going out for a zone 2 run, an easy run, most people just cannot control their heart rate remotely enough. If you're only given a few weeks to zone 2, and it's all running based, your first few weeks aren't going to be in zone 2. There's no way you can keep your heart rate down. If you're checking off your watch, like, the watches are not that accurate. Like, I've done a few tests on this myself. I'm going to put more out on that. You need the chest strap. Most people don't have them. At and wrist base isn't accurate enough. But the unnatural movement and the fact your heart rate is so high, you're realistically not getting enough from it. Now, when I spoke to him as well, he said those type of fast twitch athletes, they probably can get a good bit from like 30 minutes at a time. You think of zone 2, at least 40 minutes, if not longer. The more, like, if you've done very little true aerobic work, you will get a good bit from 30 minutes. But trying to do it running, I just don't think it's a good idea. I'd much rather see it done in some low impact way, a bike, a cross trainer, are probably the best, because it's easier to control your heart rate. It's hard to get excited and push really hard. Even an assault bike, I find, because the arms are doing so much work, it just drives heart rate up a good bit as well. That's very difficult to control. If you have the discipline to keep your heart rate down, if you've the time to give to it, which can be difficult enough in terms of getting the right zone 2 stuff, or cardiac output as it was called 10 years ago, you can get benefits from it, but you need to be quite patient with it. It is very beneficial, because so many GAA players don't do enough base level aerobic work, have never done it, because it's all intervals, it's all games. They're very good, and we should do a good bit that way, but it doesn't develop that low end aerobic stuff. So I just would be mindful of going on zone 2 runs. It's unlikely, unless you have some form of running or athletics background, that you're actually in zone 2 for it, and you're probably making yourself more tired and ingraining poor running mechanics habits, as opposed to getting the overall aerobic benefits from. You touched there on the more aerobic intervals. What way are you looking at them?
I suppose, look, it depends on where a team is at, really. If you're kind of really starting to scratch, you might just kind of, I know it's gone out of fashion, really, the mass type runs have gone out of fashion, but like, you can really get a lot done there, while still keeping a good bit of your session for the sport you're actually trying to play. If you're going down that route, if teams are a little bit, I suppose, more advanced, then I do enjoy kind of bring lads into, say, like 250, 300 meter intervals there, one on, one off, and pushing lads on that way. I find that can bring a good bang for your buck there in kind of a short period of time too.
they're fairly controlled reps. Like you're not saying 300 all out and timing it and try and beat your time. It's more pull it back a
No,
bit.
no,
Is
no.
it?
It's yeah. It's you're looking to hit the similar times each rep. You're just looking to kind of recover your time spent running is the same time you spent recovering. So we're trying to kind of just have that, you know, on off, and just trying to repeat the same thing, because there's what I find is that when it is a case of trying to increase your runs, I find that a lot of lads they'll hold back, and then they'll have their last run, and it's the, you know, one of the best runs they'll ever do, and they're not really building themselves up the way I'd like them to. So generally speaking, I kind of give lads a set time that, depending on what group they're in, how they're getting on, what I'm looking for them to get in, and just kind of try to stick to that then. And it could be, you know, depending on the session, there could be anywhere from, you know, maybe 6 to 9 of those runs in a session.
I do similar enough. I actually don't mind them going all out on that last one. I just make sure there has been enough done beforehand to get the work at the right intensity. So when they're going for it on the last one, I'm like, "Grant, just go for it. I'll give you your time. I'll let you race each other. I don't mind." They're generally like, they're longish enough runs that they're not going to like hurt themselves really, bar like, you know, their lungs will be sore or whatever. And you mentioned mass there. Like a lot of people associate mass as like the 15 on, 15 off, 78, 82, 84 meters. Like mass is just your, like, it's maximum aerobic speed. You can use any percentage. You don't have to be tied to the 115, 120%. Those type of like 300 meter runs, 1 minute efforts, I like those around 90%, so they're pulled back a little bit from the mass. You can give them little time gauges. If you want, you can set out markers. So at 15 seconds, I want you hitting around here. At 30 seconds, I want you hitting around here. Like setting out a 300 meter, not a loop, a U shape, and just set your markers at whatever distance it should be around that time, and just giving all 3, 2, 1, and one that is 5 yards ahead of the marker. I'm like, you're getting a bit excited there, pull back now, control yourself for the next one. And do like 6 or 7 of those, and then say, right, your last one, you can go for it here, I don't mind. They might think they're getting the big fitness benefit from going for it on that last one, but realistically, it's all the controlled ones beforehand that's building the base of aerobic fitness. I don't even mind going a bit longer with them. Like they're minute reps. I do like a few 3 or 4 minute reps as well, if you can get the time for them, and if you can control the players enough on them. Something important there is to group them. I'd group them in even smaller groups fitness-wise. Like if ideally we could put heart rate monitors on them and keep them in the controlled zones. But if you have a group of like 15, 20 lads setting off together, someone is going too slow. About 2 lads are going too slow. 5 of them are probably going the right pace. And the next 10 are clinging on to the back of a group with their heart rate up around 170, 175, when you want it back around somewhere 145, 150. But they don't want to fall off because they're thinking, oh, I'm getting unfit. You need to train and build at your current fitness, not necessarily the one you want to jump up to, because the heart rate and all does matter for building aerobic stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, and that is something I would be looking to push. Like if I'm watching someone in their group, and I do split into different groups depending on their, you know, I use a Bronco just to test lads, see where they're at. Depending on where they're at in that, I set them out in their groups. But if I feel like somebody is actually they're really in that kind of hard work zone, and that's not where I want them to be, I will pull them back a group. But it's similarly too, some lads are very good at coasting too, and you know, push them on. So I think it's wise to have those groups quite malleable, that you're paying attention to what's happening in front of you, and if somebody is under pressure, move them back, you know, or if somebody just looks like they could almost have a conversation while they're going, move them up, you know, and not kind of going off like, oh, well, we've tested here, this is your group, I'll test you in 6 weeks and we'll see where we go again, because I do know that happens. But you know, being malleable on any given night and kind of going, here, I can see what you're doing, you move up, move back, and I think that's an important thing too from a progression perspective, because if some fella is coming up to you and he's going to the well every run, like he's probably heading down a route where he's going to be injured fairly soon.
You'll find those first couple of weeks of training there'll be massive changes in fitness as well. Like some lads have, like they've done absolutely nothing. You might have been knocked out last September and they have like just really enjoyed their winter. 3 weeks of training will make a massive boost to where their fitness is at. Where someone else could have put in their best pre-season or off-season ever, they actually won't get a big improvement there. So that's why you need to change lads up or down. The last point I'll make in this is, I think it's so important to spend a bit of time getting your players to learn how to gauge off RPE. Like if you don't have GPS, if you don't have heart rate monitors, or you just don't want the hassle of managing it at all, if they can figure out decent RPE ratings of effort, it's worth so much, and hold them to being honest to themselves. Like I want this to be a 5 out of 10. 2 reps in, how hard is that? Oh, it's about 7 out of 10. Slow down, please. Just slow yourself down. You go as hard as you like on the last 2 minutes, at the last 4 minute rep. I don't mind there, but let's build a bit of work at the right intensity first, and then you can send it. Don't mind then.
Mm-hmm. And I use RP quite a bit, but it's a tough one when people are in a group setting to try, and that's where like really spending time with your players and coaching them on it, because there's always that bit of competition. There's always that like, do you know what, I'm not letting him get away from me there, and you know, right, you can get away with it for the last rep or two, you're fine, but for the bulk of training you do want lads to be very honest with it, which is tough, especially with lads who are maybe competing for spots, or even like friends in the same team. You know, people want to have one up on each other, but that's discipline that you mentioned, you know, with your training, with your running, and being honest with yourself so that you can actually improve according to what I suppose what outcome your coach is looking for.
The smaller groups I find are a help there. Like instead of having a group of 15 or 20, have like little groups of 4 or 5, and send them running in different directions. Like set up a little path. Okay, you go through the red cones and set them out, you know, biggish distances apart. So one group is doing a loop, one group is doing a W, one group is doing a U. So they don't actually realise distance-wise who's ahead or who's behind them. And when you're going off time and RP anyway, it's not hugely important what distance they're covering, especially if like the ground they're running on is fairly variable. Last year, I gave them the option of going on, there's a really nice walking track around the pitches, so I gave them the option of putting on runners and going on that, putting on runners or going on the grass, or putting on boots and going on the heavier grass, so they can go on whichever they wanted. And we're in small groups then within that. So because you're going off time, like, they only really know where their own little small group of people are. They can't realistically compete, if that's the word, with any of the other ones, because they're essentially doing different runs, just the same work for the same time. We'll move on from the aerobic stuff then. What I was surprised at this now, the 10 to 15% increase in high speed running, that's not a major shock, but the 30% decrease inside your 3v3s, we probably all, at club level anyway, don't have the luxury of like really being certain of who our exact 3v3 inside are. There's going to be a little bit of changing around there, both in terms of managing workload and just variability of players. But the odd time there might be someone who's predominantly going to be up there. What's that changing for what we're doing physically for them?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I suppose. When you take in how the game has gone for the past 10 years, there's been a lot of flooding back the field, flooding up the field. So your inside players, while they might be listed there as, with the number on their back, were quite often found in their own half of the field, and whereas now obviously that's going to change. And while not every team is going to have the luxury of saying, right, well, we have these 3 inside players, that's it, and we've these 2 lads on the bench who will fit into those positions, and we're like, not a lot of teams are going to have that. A lot of teams are going to have, they might have one player who happens to be, they're out and out corner forward or out and out full forward, but the rest of them are going to most likely be somewhat fluid. And so, like, from that perspective, I think it's probably too early in the year to be separating them out and going, here, look, we're going to be very specific with what you're doing here, because it's just far too early in what's basically a new game to be doing that. If it turns out that you actually, you are in a position that you can kind of go, right, these are inside players, whether that's full back line or full forward line players, these are inside players, and these ads are subs for those positions, these ads are kind of our starters in those positions. What needs to be, I suppose, taken into account with those type players is that it's explosive off the mark, it's deceleration, and it's change of direction. Like, they are going to be, I suppose, they're going to need to be quite sharp with those kind of things. So when you're looking at that, so your high speed running might be lower, but your amount of sprints might be up. I think how's it counted for sprint? Is it The number isn't coming to me at the moment, but your actual number of sprints might be up, even though your overall high speed running might be lower, which means that explosive off the mark acceleration, deceleration, change of direction is going to be massive for those players. That's before you ever need to look at the actual skill of executing, say, shots or anything like that. It's going to be more explosive than your middle eight players.
Yep, I was actually looking at a paper on needs analysis of hurling yesterday. I was doing a group in work, and I think the 3v3 in football might become more similar to the front or the inside backs forwards in hurling now. I'm just looking at some numbers around sprints there now that you ask. So how we looked at yesterday was, I think full back, full forward were in around 500 metres of sprint distance. But what I found really interesting there was they were doing, on average, and there'll obviously be a bit of difference here, 18 to 20 sprints per game, averaging 18 metres each. But the standard deviation there, it was actually a large standard deviation on the average sprint distance. But the average time of sprints was 3 seconds, and the average recovery between sprints was 2.5 to 3 minutes. So you're going all out for 3 seconds, and you have quite a long recovery there. So as you said, it might be the sprint distance, it might be the amount of sprints, but it's probably more likely to be the actual intensity of that sprint, that change direction, that acceleration, that deceleration is potentially going to change with decent recovery between all those. So it's the absolute output is probably going to go up, but with greater recovery between those. That'll facilitate the greater output, but we do need to be physically prepared for those more, what are already explosive movements, but a drive and intensity of them. So like, we can do some bits on the pitch, we can do some bits in the gym. What are we potentially targeting to prepare players to be more explosive, but also to help, I suppose, from a tissue point of view, to facilitate them?
So absolutely on the field, working on on actual explosive off the mark speed. Of course, you're going to have to work on that. You're going to have to section out time for that, which I do know has been probably a point of contention for a lot of clubs over the years. That doing short, explosive work, change of direction. It's often kind of put in almost like I should do 2 or 3 minutes of that there, and we'll be fine. Whereas now you're probably going to have to actually have lads learning how to sprint off the mark, focusing in a little bit more on change of direction, that it isn't just kind of like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll just go this way, that you're becoming a little bit more specific in your training for that. Again, you're not going to put aside a long portion of a large portion of your training session for it, but it probably does need a little bit more of a specific approach than what tends to be just like, look, we'll throw in a few cones there, look, sprint out, walk back, sprint out, walk back, all right, we'll go play a game. There's going to have to be something a little bit more specific done there. But this is going to come back to, I feel, your base level of strength in your hamstrings, your glutes, your adductors, your calves. There's going to be so much of a demand there for your base level of strength to be higher than maybe it may have been previously. And I would have an area that there is a huge, I suppose, overlook of, I feel, in the GAA is plyometrics. Box jumps, broad jumps, single leg jumps, pogo jumps. There's a lot there that you can get a lot out of those if they're done well and they're done consistently enough. One of the things that we look at with, say, preparing to be on the field with strength work, we might have, a couple of sets of a couple of reps of, say RDLs, deadlifts, squats, whatever. So you could end up with maybe 100 or so reps in the week. Your plyometric work needs to be up in the thousands per week if you really want to stay resilient enough for sprint mechanics, for your actual explosive sprinting movements, for your change of direction. There is a lot of, or there will be a larger demand on those plyometric movements, which I do feel is probably overlooked in the GAA.
Yeah, I think we might be helped by dipping in a few isometrics. I know I've pretty much dropped the classic stretch and cool downs now and do isometrics at the ends of training. They're just a help to, I think they just help the tendons as much as anything else, and they can keep strength topped up without huge extra load on players. The other bit I'm tying with this year is dipping in some deep tier plyos, the real sinky ones where you're getting down into it. Muscularly you can be a bit sore after them the first few times you do them, but I think they will be quite helpful in preparation for a lot of the. Oh, this is obviously a term now that is way overused in the last few months, but deceleration and braking, I think people are going a little bit too far down that route lately, but it is still important. I think some of them might help condition us for the demands of that. But I think you're bang on that strength base is going to be so important. Finding time in your week to, even early in the season, to dedicate time to being strong and staying strong for the season is going to be so important for teams. And that's a case of blank slate of the week. What are the key sessions we want to hit? Where does strength fit in around that so we can get it in so that it's not taken from the pitch stuff, it supplements it and supports it, but you can still get quality work in.
No, it's for me with the strength, because time is tight. You know, if you're on the field 3 times in the week, two field sessions in a game, you're only going to get 2 gym sessions in there max. You know, if you've children at home or a stressful job like that could easily become one gym session there in the week. So you really do need to be looking at, well, what are we doing here? Is there stuff here that we don't need? And for me, I find the kind of contrast kind of approach to getting your strength exercise and contrasting it then with a plyo kind of exercise. Say you might be pairing up, say a back squat there or front squat with say a broad jump. You get in, so you're working in that strength, but then you're also pairing it up with that explosive work, and you're trying to tick a couple of boxes without adding a massive workload to the player, who obviously has a life outside of playing the sport as well. So for me, just trying to pair up 2 exercises together to try and get a lot of those bases kind of covered.
They're good in season, provided fresh enough. I still think you need to dedicate that time to building up a base level of strength. Going straight into power stuff, I know power will develop strength a bit, but I think so many lack that bit of time dedicated to just getting properly strong. Plus, a lot of your sport should still develop a bit of power. Like the play in the game, there's a lot of powerful stuff in there. And I think if you've strength underneath that and put that on top of it, you will get a benefit there. But if you just do all power stuff and don't have some bit of strength dipped in during your week, or at least like every fortnight, I think it catches up on that. Any final points to wrap this up?
No, I think just to highlight one of the points you made last week, which was, start with where you are, not where you'd like to be. Gradually build up. This isn't something you're not going to change the athlete that's in front of you in a couple of weeks from what they're used to being. You're going to have to work on this across the season, possibly 2, maybe even 3 years, like you mentioned earlier. And it is just important to pay attention to it, because what you don't want is to go, look, we want to get to this point here. We're going to get there in the next 6 to 8 to 10 weeks. And all of a sudden half your team are sitting down with, hamstring injuries, calf injuries, they're fatigued, they're worn out, they're getting sick. These are real, I suppose, risks of just going to where you'd like to be before you actually earn the right to be there.
Yeah, that's good. Final point I'll make is, think of one of the most conditioned teams I've seen over the last few years, the Limerick Hurlers. They didn't just do one winter to get that conditioned. It's years and years and years of work on top of it. It's also high levels of conditioning on top of an efficient system that they all know how to play really well, and how the two of those marry together. So don't just look at, I wonder what Limerick did for a 6-week conditioning block to be at that level. It's stacked on top of years of work. So don't try and be the most conditioned team you've ever been this August. Be as conditioned as you can be, provided you can get all your important players on the field, and then look to build on that in 2026 and again in 27 and so on after that. Damien, excellent. Thank you very much for your time, and the people who sent me on a few numbers around what they've been doing as well. I really appreciate that. And if you have further updates on it over the next weeks and months, I'd be delighted to hear as well, to see how things are going or what changes you've made that help, but also maybe definitely don't help and people should avoid.